Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for your blessings. Again, we are grateful for your goodness, your mercy, your grace. You are a wonderful God. We thank you for being a wonderful God. We are grateful for all that you have done. Lord, thank you for your blessings through this most recent camp meeting that just ended yesterday. And we ask that the messages there might reverberate out and bless many. And we pray that you work mightily and abundantly. And this evening, as we consider from a physical health standpoint, the various different causes of dysfunction in the body. And then, as we discuss and have questions afterwards, we ask for your Holy Spirit to be here to lead us and guide us. And Lord, bring about your will, your good will, and your good way, we pray in Jesus' name. Amen. All right. The causes of dysfunction. So we're looking at things from a physical health standpoint. The causes of dysfunction. Again, we need to have a firm foundation that we use as we evaluate information, whatever that information is. We need to have something that we can filter it through that doesn't change, that is what it is, that is observable, that can be learned, but does not need interpretation. And so we have the fundamental law that nothing exists or functions from itself, and that nothing exists or functions for it. So that all things have the need, they have need, power, materials, resources, and all things uses what it needs to do something, to give something. And so there is a taking, there is a giving, there is never any exception to taking and giving, except for God. But in creation, in nature, there's always a taking and a giving. We always function as a channel, so there's an entrance and an exit. At the entrance, we take, at the exit, we give, and in the middle, we use. And there is cause and effect. And so when it comes to creation, no matter how small, no matter how large, everything, every part of creation functions according to this fundamental law. And last week, we were looking at from function to dysfunction. And before that, the week before, we were looking at the foundation of function. And we saw that everything, every step along the way in our biological systems, and we were looking at digestion as the example, every step takes, uses, and gives, takes, uses, and gives, takes, uses, and gives. And and so praise the Lord, that's how the Lord has set it up to work. And so as we continue looking at other health conditions, we want to look at what happens from a take and give perspective, from the law of life's perspective. And so we're going to look to understand where and how breakdown in the system can occur. And now this can help us to understand what is possible and what is not possible when it comes to dysfunction that happens in the body. And for this particular process or evaluation, we're going to look at hormone imbalance. And of course, hormone balance is a very complex mechanism in the body. As you can see, here is one. This is just the estrogen biosynthesis pathway where you turn cholesterol into pregnenolone and progesterone, pregnenolone into DHEA, progesterone into androstenedione. And then the DHEA can also convert into androstenedione, which can then form into estrone or testosterone, and then estradiol and so on. But that's just part of one pathway. and there are many different hormones, many different pathways, and the regulation of it is actually quite complex. But we're going to try to look at it in a somewhat simplistic way so that we can understand really from the beginning. And we need to understand from the beginning. Right? So what happens is first you have the needs that are in the body. Those needs are measured. There has to be a way of measuring the things that are different that are needed. So whether that is whether that whether that's how much fluid that you have in your system, whether that's how much of various different electrolytes or nutrients that you have in the system, how much pressure is inside the blood vessels, how fast is the heart beating, how much oxygen level, how much is the oxygen level in the bloodstream versus the carbon dioxide level versus lactic acid versus, other things. And so that there's always a measure for those various different things. It's measured by the nerves, the peripheral nerves. It's sent back to the central nervous system up to the cortex. That is received by the spirit. It's analyzed, and then a decision is made. And with the decision, then the spirit puts that decision into the body, and it generates an electrical impulse in the cortex. And then the neuron or the neurons in the cortex then take that power, and which forms now the electrical impulse in the cortex of the brain. A neuron then transmits, that's the using, that electrical impulse to a part of the lower brain called the hypothalamus. And that's right, it's this kind of little blue spot here in the middle. It's not really blue, but that's just so you can see it. Um, and in the hypothalamus, the neurons then are going to release or give neurotransmitters in this region. There are other neurons in this region that are going to take in that neurotransmitter. So now you have a taking and by those cells in the hypothalamus. And under the influence of that neurotransmitter, the cells of the hypothalamus start or stop, increase or decrease their production of hormones. And there are a number of different hormones produced by the hypothalamus. So that's the using. Then those hypothalamic cells, those cells in the hypothalamus, are going to release those hormones. So that's the giving. And it's going to be released into little blood vessels. You can see that there's little blood vessels around here. And so it's released into those little blood vessels that take those hormones. And now they're going to transport the hormones down here to the pituitary gland. And and then those hormones are going to be given by the blood vessels to the pituitary gland. They're chemicals, right? And then the pituitary cells, the cells in the pituitary gland, are going to take in those hormones, right? And and then those pituitary cells are going to start or increase their production of certain pituitary hormones because the pituitary gland produces various different hormones. And these are the major regulating hormones of then the rest of the hormones in the body. So the pituitary cells, now they're going to release or give their hormones, which are taken into other blood vessels, and then they're going to be transported, right? That's the use, to the rest of the body. So one segment of blood vessel is going to transport it to another, which will transport it to another, and to another, and to another, and to another. So there's a taking, giving, taking, giving, taking, giving, taking, giving all along the way. And when the blood gives the pituitary hormone to the appropriate hormone producing organ in the body, because it circulates through the bloodstream and then it gets to the various different organs, whether that's the thyroid, the thymus. If you're above about 2 years of age, you probably don't have a thymus anymore. Um, your adrenal glands, pancreas, uterus, ovaries, testes, and so on. Um, and that organ is now going to take in the pituitary hormone. So now you have it taking. And as a result, the organ cells are going to increase their production of the hormone. So now they're going to start using the hormone. They're going to increase their production of the hormone that's specific to that organ, like the pancreas produces insulin. It also produces glucagon, and it produces, well, those are the hormones. It also produces digestive enzymes. The thyroid produces, thyroid hormone, and ovaries will produce estrogen, right? You have testes that produce testosterone and so on, right? So you have these various different hormones. That's not all. There's multiple hormones usually in each of these endocrine organs, but it's an example. Now, the cells of that organ are going to release their hormones, so they're giving, and right, and that's going to be given to blood vessels that are then going to transport that hormone, that's the using of it, to their target cells or tissues or organs or organ systems. For example, like in your thyroid, the thyroid releases thyroid hormone. Well, that thyroid hormone then gets into the bloodstream, it circulates throughout all of the body, and in one way, it helps to regulate metabolism. So the more thyroid hormone you have, the higher your metabolic rate. And the lower your thyroid hormone that there is, then the lower your metabolic rate. That's just one of the functions of thyroid hormone. If estrogen is released and it's released in higher levels over a period of time, then you're going to have the development of secondary sex characteristics like the development of breasts and so on. And then with testes and the production of testosterone, if that's at a certain level and it's circulating around the body, then it leads to the increase in the growth of muscle mass and hair production in the face and other things of that nature. Right? So those target cells, they're going to take in the hormone. And as a result, the cells either increase, decrease, start, or stop their specific functions. So now they're going to use that hormone in order to now regulate their function, right? And neurons or sensory cells, they're going to test the levels of the products that the cells produce. So if the cells produce acid, or they produce an enzyme, or they produce a hormone, or they produce mucus, or they produce cell signaling molecules, or other things of that nature. Well, that can be tested. That can be taken in by the sensing cells, right? And now it's going to transmit a signal back up eventually to the cortex of the brain, where that information then comes up to that electrical impulse is now given. The spirit takes that information, it evaluates it, that's the using, the analyzing it, and then makes a decision of what to do based upon that information. And so that's a decision that's made, and then the decision generates an electrical impulse in the cortex, which then goes back through the body, and then we begin the process again, right? And so through the same complex pathway, the the function of cells and tissues and organ systems are controlled. They're regulated. They're by increasing or decreasing, starting or stopping the function of the different parts of the body system in order to make sure that everything is working together, everything is coordinated, and everything is functioning correctly. So the question is, where can error or dysfunction be introduced into a system that functions like this? Right. Well, again, we recognize that chemical reactions function according to the laws that govern their function. And electrical impulses function according to the laws that govern their function. And every physical process functions according to the laws that govern each part of that physical process. And we also recognize that those laws that govern each of those pieces of overall function, those laws do not change. Right? So the hypothalamus takes in certain signals, and it does so by law. It's law that governs that to happen. The hypothalamus responds to those signals and it uses those signals in a certain way, and that is by law. And the hypothalamus produces and releases or gives certain hormones, and that is by law. And the blood takes those hormones and transports them. And the transporting is with diffusion, and diffusion happens by law, right? And the pituitary gland takes in those hormones, and that happens by law, and so on. And the whole process that we looked at from the hypothalamus to the pituitary gland, and then to the different endocrine organs of the body, and then their production and release, and that going around to the different cells of the body and the cells, then modifying their function according to that. All of this happens by law. So every step of taking, using, and giving in the physical process functions by law. And if every step of the process functions by law, then where can error or where can dysfunction be introduced into a system that functions by law and functions by law and functions by law if laws do not change? Well, one of the places that you can introduce error into the system is in inheritance. Another is in the chemicals that you have in the system or that have exposure to. A third way is through physical trauma. And a fourth way is the mind. So we're going to go through each of these and look at what it looks like if it's this as the cause, right? If it's inheritance, what does that look like? If it's chemicals, what does that look like? If it's physical trauma, what does that look like? If it's the mind, what does that look like? And this is important because it helps us to differentiate what is the cause of my condition. Can it be inheritance? Can it be a chemical cause? Can it be physical trauma? Can it be the mind? Right. And of course, there's the possibility of combinations. And so, could it be something that's a combination? So, this we need to consider. So, when it comes to inheritance, we recognize that the information that is used to build our cells and to make the products that the cells produce, that information is in the form of our genetic material and such as DNA. It's not just DNA. There are other parts of genetic material as well, but DNA is a central component of that, and we're generally familiar with that because of our education system. And certain sections of your DNA, called genes, contain information that is used to make a protein. So here's your protein. You have a gene. There's a process in between the information that's here in the gene and then the production of a protein. But a gene is a segment of DNA that contains the information to make a particular protein. Right? Now, much of the structure of the cells and the organelles of the cells, the little organs inside the cells, much of it is made up by proteins. And the enzymes the cells use to function are also made of proteins. And much of the products that the cells make and release into the surrounding environment and then go to other cells and so on, well, that's proteins as well. Not just that. There are some sugar molecules attached to it as well. There's some so there's some carbohydrate components or some sugar components. There are some fatty components that can be there as well. But proteins are the primary component of structure and function in the body. And proteins are necessary for the structure, they're necessary for the function, and they're necessary for the products of the cells. If you remove proteins, well, you die. You can't live without them. So if there is damage to the DNA for some reason, right? And we'll talk about the reason later. But if there's some damage to the DNA for some reason, or if there are errors when the cell copies the DNA, then the gene can be damaged. And when the gene is damaged, it can change the structure of the protein that it codes for, and which changes the function or the capacity of that protein. So if I have a normal functional segment of gene here with the proper information, I can end up with a normal protein. But here, when I have a broken information, a broken part of that, then I can either end up with an abnormal protein or I can end up with no protein because the dysfunction is at such a critical component that it just won't be able to fold and so on, right? And so, whenever and wherever that protein is used in the cell from the dysfunctional DNA, from the broken blueprint, it will affect how the cell functions. Right? It'll affect how the cell functions. And it will not affect it in a good way, it will affect it in a bad way. Now, think of your genetic material like a blueprint that's needed in order to build a house. If you damage the blueprint, whatever is made that is according to the damaged part of the blueprint, it's not going to be made correctly. So if it is not made correctly, it will affect the structure of the house in the area that corresponds to where the blueprint was damaged. But it won't affect the rest of the house that's made according to the correct blueprint. So, for example, if I have a blueprint and it has a mistake in the electrical diagram for the bathroom, well, the the rest of the house might be built well, but I will find the dysfunction in the bathroom, but not the rest of the house, because the bathroom was built according to the dysfunctional blueprint, which had a problem with the design of the electrical system in the bathroom, but not in the rest of the house, right? So when we take the house analogy and we put it into a cell context, well, we see that it happens similarly, right? If someone has a disease as the result of inheritance, then several things must be true. First of all, the damage to the DNA or the blueprint happened in a prior generation. That happened with parents, grandparents, and so on. That's part of the definition of inheritance. It came from a prior generation. And secondly, you received that damaged blueprint when you were only one cell, which was came with a union of sperm and the egg coming together, and then you have one cell. Now, from that one cell, all of your cells arise. So you're going to have that one cell that divides into two cells and then four and so on and so forth. And it's going to continue developing. And then as it develops, it's going to specify. And now you're going to have some of those cells that turn into skin, other cells that turn into nervous tissue, other cells that turn into heart or muscle, some that it turns into bone, and so on, right? So it continues to differentiate as the embryo and then the fetus develops. But every one of the cells in the body will have a copy of the damaged blueprint because they all came from the first cell. Now, certain cells only use certain parts of the blueprint, and these are examples of various different types of cell, right? So here you have a muscle cell. Here you have a sperm cell. Here you have a surface cell or an endothelial type of cell. And this is the top surface with its little microvilli. Here you have fat cells, and here you have a nerve cell or a neuron. And here you have a cell that's probably producing mucus and so on, right? So the various, and this is a white blood cell and so on. So you have various different types of cells, and not every cell uses every part of the blueprint. You have over 200 different types of cells in your body. And each type of cell has a certain structure or certain products that it produces that no other type of cell in the body has or produces. And if it wasn't the case, then it wouldn't be a different type of cell. And only cells that will be affected by the broken blueprint are the cells that use that part of the blueprint. So let's say that the broken blueprint is in the molecule that makes up mucus that lines the stomach. Well, if that's the case, then your mucus producing cells will have the dysfunction. But you won't see the dysfunction in any other type of cell that's not producing mucus. You won't see it in your neurons, you won't see it in your muscle cells, you won't see it in your fat cells, you won't see it in the sperm, you won't see it in the skin cells, and so on, right? But you will find it, you will see the dysfunction in the cells that produce mucus. Every cell of a particular type will use the same parts of the blueprint. So if there is a disease that's the result of inheritance, it must manifest itself not just in one cell of that type, not just two, three, four, most, and so on. It must manifest itself in every cell of that type because every cell of that type uses the broken blueprint, the broken DNA, in order to try to produce its product, which is the mucus, but now you have a damaged mucus producing a mucus molecule, right? Or the component in the cell that produces the mucus, the organelle responsible for producing the mucus, the DNA, the code for it was broken, so that component of the cell is dysfunctional, and therefore the product that it produces is dysfunctional. It can be from a number of different areas, but it must be like this, that it affects all cells of the same type. So if it's inheritance, all cells of the same type must be affected. Right. And so if the cause is inheritance, the problem will not manifest in some cells of a particular tissue, right? So you have the problem here in these two cells, but no problem in those cells. Or these two cells are functioning and those cells are not functioning. When that's the case, you can know that it's not inheritance. It's not inheritance. So that cannot be the case. Right? So it must manifest throughout all cells of the same type if it is inheritance. So this means that inherited diseases will not begin in a few cells and then grow from there. Like colon cancer or rectal cancer, this would be colon cancer in the sigmoid colon. So it starts here and then it begins to grow from there and so on. Now that's not inheritance. It will manifest everywhere those cells are found. So you would see it all throughout the colon if it was truly inheritance. So colon cancer that develops in a part of the colon and grows from there cannot be the result of inheritance alone. Now, it doesn't mean that there can't be a background of genetic issues, and we'll talk about that in a minute. So there could be a background of genetic issues, but if it begins in one part of it, then there has to be something else that's causing it to start in that part. And it's not inheritance that causes it to start in that part. Arthritis in a joint or several joints cannot be the result of inheritance alone. A nodule in the thyroid that grows right in the thyroid, or the overgrowth of one side of the thyroid and the other side is normal, that cannot be the result of inheritance alone either, because you still have the same types of cells on both sides. It has the same broken blueprint, and so it should have the same manifestation if it is simply inheritance. Now, another aspect of inheritance is that the condition is going to manifest from the time that the person is little, right? Because the blueprint is the blueprint, and the problem in the blueprint is the problem in the blueprint, and it's there from the time that it's little. And it's there, it remains there. And so the symptoms associated with an inherited condition, if they are caused by that inherited condition, should not come and go. The symptoms shouldn't come and go. The symptoms should remain because the problem remains. If they come and go, then there must be other factors other than just inheritance um, that are involved in the condition. So hormone imbalance that develops at a time later in life, right? You had normal hormone stuff going on when you were a child and whatever. Later on, you end up having hormone imbalance. And especially when that hormone imbalance is up and down and variable and so on, that is not inheritance, cannot be inheritance, right? Can't be. Now, when we talk about inheritance, we're not talking about DNA that becomes damaged or dysfunctional in your own lifetime, and so on. We're not talking about epigenetics and the moment by moment regulation of the genes or the genome, the entire set of information. We are only talking about defects in the DNA that occurred in a prior generation and are passed on into future generations, right? Those other issues of breaking the genes, dysfunction of the genes that happen in your lifetime, it's another issue that, well, let me just cover it briefly. You have robust mechanisms to preserve the information in the DNA. There are molecules that check and make sure that the DNA structure is the way it's the way that it's supposed to be. There are almost like proofreading molecules that go through. And when there is a dysfunction that's found there, there's two components that don't fit together very well. It will take the one out and it will put a correct one in, and so on. And so you have robust mechanisms in order to preserve the purity of the genetic information, especially when you take one cell and you replicate that genetic information so that now you can have two cells. And then you replicate that information so that you can have four cells. And then you replicate that information so that you can have eight cells, and so on. So there are robust mechanisms in order to preserve the purity of the DNA in that whole process. And if it gets broken down, the question is, well, what's going on with those mechanisms? What is it that can cause those mechanisms to dysfunction at some point when they were functional at another point? And that's not going to be answered by inheritance. It's going to be one of the other things that we cover here in a minute. So another thing that we can look at, a second cause for dysfunction in the body, is chemicals. And so in seeking to understand how chemicals work, let's consider a few scenarios. And in this scenario, you're taking a cruise across the Pacific Ocean, and your cruise liner sinks. Unfortunately. But fortunately, you survive and you make it to a small Pacific island. Right? It's pretty small, but there's trees and other things like that, but there's lots of beach and you're surrounded by water. And thank you, nice coral reef. Right? On the white sandy shore of that island, you see something off in a distance. As you walk closer to it, wow, you notice there is a highly detailed sandcastle. So you run into this highly detailed sandcastle on this Pacific island. Do you conclude that one, the sand made the sandcastle and there's likely no one else on the island and you're alone? Or the sand cannot make a sandcastle, therefore there must be someone else on the island. You are not alone. Yes. So while sand cannot make a sandcastle, no one can make a sandcastle without sand. Right? So there must be sand in order to make a sandcastle, because without the sand, you cannot make a sandcastle. But the sand itself never makes the sandcastle. There is always something else that uses or acts upon the sand in order to make the sandcastle. And so this is an example that we can look at in a larger context to show us what happens with chemicals on a microscopic context, or even submicroscopic on a very small context. So let's now look at another example. Here you have the Great Salt Lake in Utah, and it is predominantly made of water, sodium, potassium, magnesium, lithium, and chlorine. These are the major constituents. There's, of course, more, but those are the major constituents. If you go to the Great Salt Lake, and do you expect to see a big blob of water in one place? A separate pile of sodium here, another pile of potassium there, another pile of magnesium there, another pile of lithium there, and another pile of chlorine over there, and so on. Or do you expect that all of the chemicals will be mixed together in relatively even concentrations throughout the lake, so that when you go to one part of the lake, well, you find water and chloride and potassium and magnesium and sodium and so on. And when you go to another part of the lake, you find essentially the same components wherever you go in the lake. Well, yes, right? They're relatively evenly distributed throughout the lake. There can be, slight variations from one part to another part, depending on where it rained, depending on where water's coming in, and other things like that. But it's going to eventually be evenly distributed throughout that lake. So, is that because it's their natural tendency of chemicals to clump together and stay together, and someone went there and forced them to mix all together in the lake? Is it mixed all together because somebody forced it to mix together, or is it because mixing is their natural tendency? Well, of course, mixing is their natural tendency. If you then dump a 5-gallon bucket of pink water-soluble dye in the northern part of the lake, what do you expect that's going to happen with that dye? Do you expect it to clump all together where you dumped it and remain there? Or do you expect it to start spreading out, eventually distributing throughout the entire lake? Well, yes, it's going to eventually distribute throughout the lake. And that's a larger example of what chemicals do on a smaller scale. Chemicals do not concentrate themselves. Let me repeat that. Chemicals do not concentrate themselves. Chemicals do not act for themselves. They simply react to whatever other chemicals and whatever external factors are present in their environment where they are. Chemicals respond to external forces in predictable ways, and that is always according to law. So under the same conditions, chemicals always react the same way, which is a good thing for chemistry class. Because if they didn't, and sometimes when you want them, well, you can make it do that because chemicals react in a predictable way. So chemicals can be concentrated by something else. You can take chemicals and you can put energy into the system. And by putting energy into the system, you can end up concentrating chemicals in one place versus another place. You can run electrical, you can run through electrodes into an electrolyte rich liquid environment, and you will have positively charged molecules that will go and concentrate near one of those probes, and near the other probe, you'll have negatively charged molecules and electrolytes or atoms or whatever going to the other one. And so you can concentrate them, but you have to add power into the system to do that. Chemicals can be used as a part of a process, but chemicals in and of themselves cannot create a process. So when it comes to chemicals in your body, chemicals will usually be absorbed into the body through your skin, through your respiratory tract, what you breathe, or your GI tract, what you drink or you eat. And once those chemicals are absorbed, then they get into the bloodstream and they're going to eventually circulate throughout the entire body. And to find out what chemicals are in your system, I don't need to tell the lab technician to draw the blood sample from a certain side of the body, from the top side or the bottom side, the front side, the back side, the right side, the left side, or I don't have to specify where they draw the sample. They can draw it from anywhere, nor do I have to tell them to get it from your arm or from your leg versus your core and so on. Okay. If there is a chemical in your bloodstream, it will be at the same concentration throughout your bloodstream. And I say for the most part, because there are some differences. Your venous system has higher concentrations of carbon dioxide and lower concentrations of oxygen, while your arterial system has higher concentrations of oxygen, lower concentrations of carbon dioxide. Lactic acid tends to be higher in your venous system than your arterial system, but you will find it in both, and it will be consistent, right? It'll be relatively consistent throughout that system. You get it from the leg, you get it from the arm, it's going to be relatively the same. And it isn't that some chemicals are sent to the arm, other chemicals are sent to your leg. Some chemicals go to the right side of your body while other chemicals go to the left side of the body. No. All chemicals get into the bloodstream and now they're going to distribute through the blood in relatively even concentrations to all different parts of the body. Again, this is like that example with the Great Salt Lake, right? You put it in one place, like in the lungs or the digestive tract and the intestines, stomach, and whatever. Now it's going to get into the bloodstream. Yes, it's going to have a higher concentration there, but once it gets past the liver and into the regular circulation, now it's going to circulate out around and it will distribute itself relatively evenly. Now, each cell has a cell membrane. It has this outside layer. That's what we call a phospholipid bilayer. And that cell membrane is used to bring some chemicals inside the cell and to keep other chemicals outside of the cell. So it's a living cell that can extract certain chemicals from the bloodstream and leave other chemicals there and not extract them. So it's a living cell itself that uses its electrochemical power to move certain chemicals against their natural concentration gradient by a process that uses power to move those chemicals upstream against their concentration gradient, and now it can concentrate those chemicals in certain places. So the cell, which has that cell membrane, and which has, when it has the fuel that it needs, has the power to do the work. The cell can concentrate chemicals in a certain place, but the chemicals themselves cannot concentrate themselves. So that means that the cells determine where the chemicals end up in the body. It's not the chemicals that determine where they end up, right? So the chemicals are the sand, and the cells are the hands, right, that build the sandcastle. And the cells are the hands that build the sandcastle. Now, since all cells are made of chemicals, and the products that they produce are chemicals, then the energy that perpetuates their function also comes from chemicals. It's the fuel, like oxygen, water, nutrients, so on. Those are chemicals. And cells must have a sufficient amount of each of the right kinds of chemicals available to them in order to be able to function well. But if they have too much of that chemical, or if they have too little, well, or if they have the wrong kinds of chemicals like poisons or venom and so on, now you're going to have a dysfunction of the cell. And since different types of cells will use different chemicals at different speeds or different rates, right? Then your cells are not going to respond the same way or at the same rate to the same deficiency or the same poison. Your brain cells use oxygen very quickly. And so if you stop breathing or you're drowning, well, it's your brain that dies first because the neurons use up oxygen the fastest and will run out of it the first. So without oxygen, however, all of your cells are going to eventually die, but they don't all die at the same rate. You might have cells, if you die, if you suffocate, well, your brain's going to die first, but you might have cells in your toe that live on for hours, continue functioning and still in the process of taking and giving for hours after the brain is dead. So it doesn't all happen at the same rate, but all of the brain cells should die at relatively the same rate, and all of your die at relatively the same rate, right? There's some variations that are there, but it should be relatively the same rate because they're the same kind of cells. All right, looks like my internet connection was unstable. I will just repeat that last statement in case it didn't come through well. The different tissues in the body that have the same types of cells should die at essentially the same rate, slight variations, but if it's the same type of cell and it's deprived of what it needs, it should die at the same rate as the other cells that are of the same type because it uses at the same speed. We know that the thyroid uses lots of iodine to do its work. So if you run low on iodine, it's going to manifest itself in the thyroid first because the thyroid's going to run out fastest, and then we'll start manifesting dysfunction. If you overdose on Tylenol, or if you're in Europe and it's Panadol or British system, it will predominantly destroy the liver because the blood that comes from your digestive tract and absorbs this poison, this Tylenol, into it, goes to your liver first. And after being absorbed through the digestive tract, the liver gets overwhelmed in its attempt to detoxify these chemicals. So, chemical exposures, whether they're too little of what you need, that's a deficiency. Whether it's too much of what you need, that's a toxicity. Whether it's a poisoning or an envenomation, they can lead to dysfunction in a certain type of cell first, but it should affect all of the cells of that type relatively evenly. But it will eventually affect all cells that use that chemical or are affected by that chemical. So let's look at a couple of conditions in the body that are traditionally thought to be caused by chemicals. The first we look at is gout. And gouty arthritis, it typically manifests either in one or both of the first metatarsal phalangeal joints. That's right there. It's at the base of the big toe, right? The joint between your foot and your great toe. And gouty arthritis is characterized by redness and swelling, pain, oh, severe pain, and in that area, and edema. And in the emergency department, some people they came in and they had gout in their left foot. Other people they came in they had gout in the right foot. Other people came in they had gout in both feet. Some people had gout in other joints as well, and so on. So we know that gout is caused by uric acid because if you go put a needle in here and you suck the fluid out and you study it under a microscope, sorry, then you will find that it has uric acid crystals inside that fluid. Now, when uric acid becomes concentrated, you put so much uric acid together in a fluid or watery environment. Eventually, that uric acid one uric acid molecule is going to then attach to the next one, and then that's going to attach to another one, which will attach to another one. And so it forms crystals and it crystallizes out of or precipitates out of that solution. And those crystals of uric acid, well, they look like this. They're like a bunch of pointy needles all over the place. And so if you got these pointy needles going on inside your joint, well, clearly that's going to result in damage to the tissues around that joint. And the result is going to be, inflammation. You're going to have severe pain. And an easier way than pulling fluid out of your toe joint to find out whether it's gout is to simply send you to the lab and have the technician draw your blood and see what your uric acid levels are in the blood. And if the uric acid level is elevated, then, well, we go, okay, well, that's gout that's going on in that toe because your uric acid levels are elevated. Now, to finally confirm, you need to draw the fluid out of the toe and see if it actually has uric acid in it. Right, that would be the real confirmation, the gold standard. So I can then give you medication, and that medication can cause your kidneys to excrete or get rid of more uric acid into the urine. And that will eventually decrease the concentration of uric acid in your body. I said gout in your body, but that's uric acid. It should decrease the concentration of uric acid in your body. And when the uric acid levels get low enough, well, then the gout goes away. And well, then you're happy and I'm happy because you're not in pain and you don't have the inflammation, and now you can put shoes on and you can walk and so on. So we fix the problem. Or did we? So was the uric acid the problem? Now, the problem with the uric acid being the problem is that I have had patients that have had very high uric acid levels in their blood. They never had gout ever in their life. And I've had other patients that had low uric acid levels and they had extensive gouty arthritis throughout many of their joints. Very painful. So how can a patient have gout in their left great toe and not have gout in their right great toe? If the uric acid concentration in the blood is the same going to the right leg as it is to the left leg, then why did the problem manifest in the left great toe and not the right great toe? Now, another way that we can ask the question is, why is the sandcastle in this part of the beach and not in that part of the beach? Right. Well, the answer is not the uric acid. It's not the sand, right? Because the uric acid is throughout the body. So the answer must explain why the uric acid is concentrated in that part of the body. And the answer must include the cells around the affected joint. Because remember, the cells must have used their cell membrane to take the uric acid out of the bloodstream and then to be able to put it out into the joint space, thus causing it to super concentrate and to crystallize. Then you have gouty arthritis that appears. But what would cause those cells to concentrate uric acid and dump it into the joint? What would make them do that? That's a question to still be answered. Now, another condition that we think of in relation to chemicals is coronary atherosclerosis, also known as coronary artery disease or heart disease. That's a condition where you have fatty deposits, those are called plaques, that they build up in the walls of the coronary arteries. Those are the arteries that bring blood from the circulating system in to supply the muscle of the heart. And those plaques get bigger and bigger and bigger over time. And usually years or even decades later, they get to the point where they start blocking the blood flow that goes through the artery and then depriving the heart muscle after that of the fuel that it needs to function. And if there's a large enough blockage, the heart muscle that's fed by the artery is going to die because it has now a lack of fuel. And that's this darker muscle tissue around here is dead because it's not getting the blood flow, while this heart tissue around here is still alive because it gets enough of the oxygen and nutrients that it needs from the blood that's still up in this area. And when this happens, we call it a heart attack. So part of the heart muscle dies because of lack of fuel. Now, since a major component of that plaque is cholesterol, then when you start developing that coronary artery disease, then one of the things that your doctor's going to want to do is put you on medication to lower your cholesterol levels. And the idea is that if you get your cholesterol levels low enough, then the plaque is going to start going away, or you're going to slow down or stop the growth of the plaque so that you can avoid or delay the heart attack. That's the idea. That's the concept. And the problem is that cholesterol, it's a necessary chemical in your body, right? It is part of every membrane of every cell in your body. It is the foundation of all of your steroid hormones in your body, like estrogen and testosterone. It is used to make vitamin D, which is itself a hormone. Vitamin D is not actually a vitamin, it's a hormone. And if you lower your cholesterol levels too low, then you disrupt normal function in other parts of the body. And in addition to that, the plaques do not develop thoroughly or throughout your body. You'll notice that if you have somebody with coronary artery disease and you do a coronary angiogram where you inject dye in through the artery and then you take x-rays while the dye is going through, the dye will show that it's very narrow here and it's open there and it's open there and it's open there, but it's really narrow there. Or if you do uh, an an ultrasound, an intravascular ultrasound, where you insert a really small ultrasound probe into the artery, and then you look at the walls of the artery while you're going through. Well, you're going to see that there is some plaque development in most of the arteries, but there's one spot, there's two spots, there's five spots that have large plaque that has developed already. So the plaque development is not even. If the cause was cholesterol itself, then the plaque development should be relatively even throughout the blood vessels, like this example of crystallization, because cholesterol can crystallize. It can. And this is an example of crystallization that happens in a tube with flow going through the tube. It should look something like this, but that's not what it looks like. It looks like this. So the usual explanation for this uneven distribution of plaque, so you have some here, you've got a little bit over here, but it's not nearly as much as that, is that the artery was damaged, and that damage led to inflammation and the development. And as long as there's damage and there's continued inflammation, then you're going to have white blood cells that are involved in this process. They continue coming here and checking out what's going on. And some of them have cholesterol in them. And if they die in the area, they leave the cholesterol behind. Right. Now, the problem with this theory is the fact that when you cut yourself and injure your blood vessels, they don't just keep bleeding and healing for years or decades. They don't. They stop bleeding in seconds, minutes, right? And then usually they heal completely within days to weeks. That's usually how it goes. But we're told that this damage of the lining of the blood vessel doesn't heal for years. It doesn't heal for decades. Well, that just doesn't make sense, right? It doesn't. So there has to be another explanation, right? There has to be. So it's clear that the cholesterol accumulates in these locations, but it must be that the cells in these locations are somehow responsible for bringing or concentrating the cholesterol and developing the plaque. But what is it that causes the cells to do that? Well, we'll leave the question and go to another example. Right? The last example that we're going to look at is that of breast cancer. So we have a woman that develops breast cancer. It develops in her right upper outer breast. Right? Let's say that she is obese. She eats lots of processed red meats, hot dogs, bacon, and salami, ham, sausages, pepperoni, jerky, corned beef, bologna, and so on, right? Let's say that she's also sedentary. She doesn't get much exercise. Her mother and her mother's mother had a history of breast cancer as well. Now, we might look at all of those, what we call risk factors, and say, oh, well, you're a woman, you're obese, you're not physically fit, you eat foods that are known to cause cancer, and you have a positive family history of breast cancer. So all of those are risk factors for you developing breast cancer, so that's why you have the breast cancer. Okay, yeah, makes sense. But if you can find any woman who is obese, who eats the same way, who is sedentary and has a family history of breast cancer that never develops breast cancer, then that woman is the proof that the risk factors aren't the cause. They're only associated with breast cancer. And also, we must ask ourselves the question, why did the breast cancer develop in the right upper outer breast? Why didn't it develop in the left breast? Why didn't it develop in the lower segment? And so on, right? The food she ate went where? Went to both breasts. And the fat deposits from her obesity, well, that involves both breasts. The genes from her mother, that's in both breasts. But the problem began in the right breast, not the left one. And the question is why? So our sandcastle is on the right side, it's not on the left side. Why is the sandcastle there? There must be something about the cells in that location that took the harmful chemicals from the food that was in the bloodstream and used it. There must be something about the cells in that location that turned on the dysfunctional genes that were there since conception. Didn't have breast cancer from little, didn't have breast cancer earlier on. Breast cancer developed later after normal function. So, do the cells do this themselves? Or are they controlled? And if they are controlled, how are they controlled? These are questions that we need to ask ourselves. If the dysfunction is caused by chemicals alone, then it must be seen throughout all cells that use that chemical, right? Just like inheritance, it cannot start in one spot amongst cells that are of the same type. It must manifest itself relatively evenly throughout those cells. If you go to the beach and you see that the beach is relatively even, well, then you think that you're alone. But when you go to the beach and you find a sandcastle that you didn't build, you know somebody else was there. And if you have hormone imbalances because you're deficient in certain nutrients, or you have an excess of those nutrients, well, what's the cause of that? What is it that decides what you consume and how much of it you consume? Hmm. Well, let's switch gears once again. There's trauma, physical trauma. Cells, every cell exists and lives within certain environmental parameters. All right. The human cells function well at normal body temperature, 37 Celsius, 98.6 Fahrenheit, but they will progressively dysfunction as the temperature increases or decreases from that level. And you can damage or destroy cells by temperatures that are too high, like burning, or too low, freezing. And one of the ways that you can transfer heat from one thing to another is through radiation. And our sun, well, it keeps our planet warm through radiation. An infrared sauna warms you up through radiation. When you stand around a fire in the cold night, and you stay warm through radiation. So you need a certain amount of radiation to remain warm and to be alive. But if that amount gets too much or too little, well, you can burn or you can freeze. And if there is too much of a certain type of radiation or radiation in certain frequencies like X-rays or gamma rays, well, then it can damage the molecules in your cells, including the DNA, beyond the capacity of the cell to heal. And every cell needs a certain chemical environment as well. And sometimes you can be exposed to certain chemicals like acids or bases that will destroy the cells or tissues that it comes into contact with. And when that happens, you have what we call a chemical burn, right? So here somebody spilled a chemical, a caustic agent, a chemical that burns, so an acid or a base on their skin, and now they have a chemical burn. Now, when it comes to trauma, your cells also function within a certain range of pressure, not just temperature. So if that pressure gets too low, so you go to very high altitudes, or you were in outer space without a spacesuit or without a space station or something, or it got too high, you went deep sea diving, too deep. You had a car accident, and now you had lots of pressure from going very fast to going not at all in a very short period of time. Uh, Cuts, falls, abrasions, and so on. When you sustain trauma to the cells and tissues of the body because of pressure, too much pressure or too little pressure, then that trauma, whether it's in the form of scraping, cutting, crushing, breaking, burning, freezing, will damage the structure of the tissues of your body. And because the structure is necessary for function, then the trauma disrupts normal function of the tissue, and then it results in dysfunction. And so trauma can be, and it often is, localized. You can crush one of your fingers with that hammer, but your other fingers are okay. You can fall asleep while you're sunbathing and burn the skin on the back of your body, but the skin on the front of your body would be okay. You can be out in the cold too long and sustain frostbite to your fingers and toes and nose and ears, but the rest of your body can still be okay. And you can undergo radiation therapy and burn a part of your body because it was irradiated, but the other parts of your body can be okay. Now, one thing that we should recognize about environment or physical trauma is that all it can do is disrupt existing function. It does not create new function. Doesn't create new function. So if you sustain a cut, a laceration, and as you heal, the scar overgrows and becomes a big keloid. Well, that isn't actually the result of trauma. The cut or the laceration is the cut is the result, or the laceration is the result of the trauma, but that keloid is the result of a dysfunction of the healing process. It's not a trauma issue, it's another issue. That's a dysfunction of the healing process. Some people may have an ulcer that develops after trauma, and it could last for a long time. Sometimes that results in the growth of a cancer in the ulcer, called a Marjolins cancer or tumor. But the cancer is not the result of the trauma. It's the result of other factors in the chronic wound. So, yes, trauma can cause dysfunction in a localized part of the body, but you usually know when the trauma happens, when you were cut, when you were scraped, when you were burned, when you had an accident, and so on. The trauma never creates a new process or a new disease. It only disrupts normal function until the trauma is healed, if it actually does heal. And if your hormone imbalance began after a physical trauma that damaged a part of your system necessary for proper hormone production and hormone function, then you should remember the event, or somebody should remember the event. But the question remains, if it doesn't heal, why doesn't it heal? Now, it's true that some traumas are too large to be repaired naturally. If you cut off your leg or it's blown off by a landmine or mine or something like that, well, we don't have the capacity to grow back a leg. But if the damage was not too large, what was it? What was it that caused it to not heal properly? All right, now let's move to our fourth cause of dysfunction, and that is the mind. The fourth cause for dysfunction in the body is the mind, and as we looked at before, every location in the body is connected through the peripheral and central nervous system to some point in your brain. And this way, the information from the body can be sent to the mind. And the mind can evaluate the information, it can decide what to do about it, and then send signals back to the appropriate parts of the body to then respond to or to regulate what happens in the body in that area. Now, the vast majority of the mind's regulation of the body is unconscious. Vast, vast majority. It is your mind that regulates all processes in the body. And that's not to say that all processes in the body need the mind to occur, but that it's the mind that ultimately controls those processes. It's the mind that increases activity, decreases activity, increases production, decreases production, and in some cases, starting or stopping activity in certain parts of the body. It's the mind that controls your blood pressure. It's your mind that controls how much fluid remains in your bloodstream. It controls your heart rate to a degree. It controls when your hormones are produced, how much of them are produced. Your mind controls your digestive system and how much acid and digestive enzymes and bile and mucus is produced. It's your mind that controls your kidneys, your liver and lungs, your reproductive organs, your skin and muscles, and the liver cells in your bones. It's your mind that controls your immune system and its functions. It's your mind that controls how much chemicals are produced in your body, and it's your mind that can regulate to a degree how much of certain chemicals are absorbed. And remember, as we looked at before, your mind is a combination of your central nervous system, your brain, your spinal cord, and your spirit. Right? It's not your brain alone that thinks. It's not your spirit alone that thinks. It's your mind that thinks. Right? It's your mind that thinks. And the mind, your brain is composed of chemicals. It's dependent upon chemicals for its fuel. And it must have certain chemicals to be able to function properly. And if those chemicals are missing, if they're in too low a concentration, too high a concentration, or if unneeded or harmful chemicals are present, then the brain can't function as it's supposed to. And this will affect the information that the spirit receives through the brain. And this messed up information because of messed up chemicals, this can lead to confusion. It can lead to delusions and hallucinations and other manifestations of mental health disorders. Now, it's not the brain itself that regulates the chemicals that it produces. It's not the brain. The chemicals the brain produces, those neurotransmitters, the neurotrophins, the neuropeptides, and so on, those are the result of the spirit's action upon the brain. And if the spirit is not functioning properly, it can then dysregulate the chemicals that the brain produces, the electrical impulses the brain has. And it can create chemical imbalances in the brain and can change to a degree the brain's structure. And those changes can also lead to confusion and delusions and hallucinations or other manifestations of mental health or brain disorders. So you can end up with mental health challenges both from a chemical standpoint of the brain or from the spirit, right? And issues that are going on in the spirit. So, since all functions in the body are regulated through the mind, you need an intact and functioning brain and an intact and functioning spirit to properly control all of the functions of the body. But what is it that the spirit needs in order to be functional, in order to function and do what it does? Well, the food for the spirit is spiritual information. And the type of information that the spirit needs is truth and love. Right. So both love and truth are spiritual information, and truth is information that puts things in the correct order so that it works. So the spirit needs this kind of spiritual information. It was made for truth, not for error, because error is information that puts things in the wrong order so that it doesn't work. And so the spirit does not need error. Now, if the spirit is under the influence of error, it will not be able to control the functions of the body the way that it's supposed to. And both the spiritual and physical dysfunction will result. You'll end up with wrong decisions, putting the wrong electrical impulses in, or at the wrong time, or the wrong order, or whatever, and resulting in dysfunction in the body as well. So the spirit's great need is love, and that is to take love from God, right? Remember, everything functions like a channel, and your spirit functions like a channel as well. So its great need is to take love from God and to give love away. And the mind does this by believing the spiritual information, the information that means love and has its ultimate source in God. And giving love motivated decisions to the body. And then the body acts upon those decisions, right, through the electrical impulses. And those decisions given to the body then control the functions and movements of the body so that through the body you can manifest love to others. Hug, kiss, acts of service, smile, other things of that nature. So, love is spiritual information that has power. And as the the spirit takes in the information and passes it along, that love gives power to the spirit to be able to function. And if the mind is deceived into believing that error is truth and truth is error, then it will take in the error. It will evaluate things the wrong way. It will make the wrong decisions, and through its wrong decisions, it will give the wrong power to the body. And the wrong electrical impulse will be generated in the cortex of the brain, And that electrical impulse will be transmitted through the nerves to the place in the body that is connected to that part of the brain. And so the wrong signal sent by that nerve will negatively impact the functions of the cells or the tissues that are controlled by that nerve. Right? And in this way, error in the mind can result in dysfunction in the body. Right? Error in the mind can result in dysfunction in the body. And the dysfunction can be very localized, right? You can have an erroneous thought that generates a wrong impulse in the upper inner portion of your right brain. And that signal can be sent down to the first joint of your left great toe, because there's the nerves carry the impulses from your right brain, crosses to the left side and goes down to the lower part of your left brain and communicates with your left body through the spinal cord. And when that signal is received by the cells in that area, they can begin concentrating uric acid in the joint space, which results in the uric acid crystallizing, and now you develop gouty arthritis. And you go and you take medication, you treat your pain and to decrease your uric acid levels, which eventually resolves the gouty attack, but you have never dealt with the erroneous thought that was the cause of the problem in the first place. So what you have done is you have treated the sand, and removing the sand, you have removed the sandcastle, but you haven't dealt with the sandcastle builder. Haven't dealt with the sandcastle builder. Similarly, you can have an erroneous thought that creates a wrong signal in the cortex of the brain. That signal can be sent to a place in the wall of your coronary artery. And in response to that signal, living cells either concentrate cholesterol or carry cholesterol from another location and leave it behind in that area. And as the signal continues, the process continues, and you eventually develop a plaque in your artery near the end of that nerve. And you take cholesterol-lowering medication, you change your diet, but you never deal with the underlying erroneous thought that created the problem in the first place. And you can have an erroneous thought that creates a wrong signal in the cortex of the brain, and that signal can be sent to the right upper outer breast. And in response to that signal, living cells in the area of that nerve change how they function. And in combination with the chemicals from processed red meats, from the nerve signals, the nerve signals resulted in certain genes being turned on and other ones being turned off. And now cancer begins to grow. When you discover the cancer, you have surgery. You undergo chemotherapy. Perhaps you have radiation treatments, and maybe you change your diet. But you don't deal with the erroneous thought that was the underlying problem. You're trying to remove the sandcastle without dealing with the sandcastle builder. Now, everybody knows stress is not good for you. And everybody knows that stress is associated with many different diseases. And everybody knows that the more stressed you are, the more likely you're going to have disease and the sooner you're going to get it. But we didn't think about how it happens, right? What's the process? We didn't think about what's behind it. We think stress is something, that we cannot control because it's dependent upon external factors that we have no control over. And so poor me, well, pour me another drink. But why have we come to that conclusion? Do you know what stress is? Do you know where it comes from? You see, stress is not but about what happens to you. It is about how you perceive what happens to you. And if your perceptions are based in error, you will be stressed. And if your perceptions are based in truth, you won't be stressed. So, what do we need? Well, we need truth. That's what we need. So, how much of the dysfunction in the body is the result of inheritance? How much of the dysfunction is the result of environment or physical trauma? How much of the dysfunction is the result of chemicals? And how much of the dysfunction is the result of the mind? Well, I will tell you, at least 90% of the dysfunction in your body is the result of your mind. The other factors make up 10% of the problem. So, our major problem in the mind and our major focus needs to be the mind. So, the major problem is the mind, and the major focus needs to be the mind. We are told sickness of the mind prevails everywhere. 9/10 of the diseases from which men suffer have their foundation here. If your hormones were not a problem before and are a problem now, if your hormone levels fluctuate over time, if your symptoms come and go or get worse and get better, and if it is not directly associated with your contact with certain chemicals, your exposure to certain chemicals, what you have eaten, what you have breathed, and come into contact with, then look to the mind for the cause. Look to the mind for the cause. When the mind creates disease or dysfunction in the body, it is never on purpose. It is never conscious. There is no personal blame for it. The person who is sick should never be judged. Never. The issue is our fallen human nature, which we are all born with and which none of us are responsible for. There's no blame for how you were born and what you were born with. But there is a problem, and that problem needs to be fixed. And it needs to be fixed in the right way and in the right place. Now, there is often a combination of these different factors involved in a disease process. It involves genetics, it involves chemical, it involves environmental factors, but the origin, the beginning point, is in the mind. And to solve the problem, you need to not only address the other secondary factors, you must get to the origin. You must address the issues of the mind. And these are some thoughts that we gain by simply evaluating the various different causes of dysfunction. So let's pray, and now we'll probably have questions. Let's pray. Dear Heavenly Father, what a wonderful God you are. Thank you for being a wonderful God. Draw us close to you. Teach us more of your will and way. Help us to understand better how you have created us to function and where dysfunction can come into the picture so that we might work in the right place and in the right way. And this we pray in Jesus' name. Amen. So a number of things for us to to think about and to consider. And as we are doing so, Maria has her hand up. Go ahead, Maria.
I had several questions, but one of them is um, I had an ANA test, rheumatoid,
All right.
and it was positive, and says that if it's positive, it's lupus.
No, not necessarily.
That's what the test results came back saying that was a possibility that was it.
Okay, that's a possibility. But again, not necessarily. If you have an elevated ANA, it's called an anti-nuclear antibody. Um, and the anti-nuclear antibody, so that's an antibody against the nucleus or the nuclear membrane in a cell. The membrane, you have a membrane that goes around the cell itself, and then you have the nucleus on the inside that's almost like a cell inside of a cell. It has a membrane as well, a nuclear membrane, and the anti-nuclear antibody is an antibody against that nuclear membrane. And the ANA is not specific for lupus. You can have an ANA elevated in almost any autoimmune condition. And if only the ANA is elevated, uh, that doesn't give you a diagnosis. It just tells you that there is some autoimmune process that is happening in the body, but it's not specific for lupus. If you want to diagnose lupus, then you need to have not only an elevated ANA, but there are certain other antibodies that you would want to see whether they're present as well. And then you look for symptoms that an individual has. And if the symptoms are consistent with the condition of lupus, the ANA is elevated, and or you have some other factors, other antibodies that are present, autoantibodies, antibodies against the body components, then you can diagnose lupus.
Is there a way to correct it, so the test results, so that manage them, or so that they can be eliminated, that diagnosis? Because I've never had an autoimmune. I've never had positive ANA, because it said if it's negative, then it's fine. If it's positive, it said it's lupus. That's what it said on the test. Um, and is there a way to resolve it without having to find out or confirm that it is lupus? Because if if there's a cause, and if we can take care of the cause, then I don't need to find out and confirm something that might not necessarily need to be present.
Exactly. So that is correct. If the cause is identified and removed, then there's no need necessarily to go and investigate further and find out what other things might be associated with that, unless there's lots of curiosity and you want to put a name to it that a doctor gives. Right? Um, and people feel relieved when they finally get a name. Oh, we finally know what it is. It is this name, and whatever. But that's just a name that a human gave to a set of symptoms or a particular condition in the body, but it doesn't tell us what the cause is. So when we're looking at autoimmune conditions, one thing that I would recommend is the presentation, the Bible on autoimmune disease. That would be a helpful one to review. And but we know that what is it that controls the immune system and its function? Well, it doesn't control itself. Must be controlled. And so, what is it that does the controlling of the immune system? Well, that would be the nervous system or the mind. And so, if there is a dysfunction where the immune system is now directed towards self, then that means that we need to look for a cause for that, especially when things were normal before. Now it's abnormal now. If you had normal function previously and now you start developing dysfunction, then, and if symptoms kind of come and go, or your ANA levels or ANA concentrations get higher or lower over time, then we can be pretty sure that the mind is behind it. It's not an inherited thing. It's not a chemical exposure thing. It's certainly not a physical trauma thing. But then we're looking at the mind. And so what's going on in the mind? It must be something that's error, not truth, because the truth is never going to cause you to destroy yourself. It's only the error that does that. And the self-destruction physically is there to indicate what's going on self-destructively in the mind. And so, what is it that's causing the self-destruction in the mind? It's going to be a false perspective. I think that I have lost something that is mine. I think that they have done it to me, and so it's a personal injustice or a personal offense. It becomes my problem, and it's something that I have to fix, and so it becomes my stress. and I have to fix others. And so it becomes my conflict, or others are trying to fix or control me. And so it's my conflict. And so there's stress, there's conflict, there's control and the loss of control, there's resentment and bitterness, there's remorse, there's guilt, and so on, right? And there's all these various different things. All of those are the result of the error. And at the very foundation of the error is the false identity that I am a God. And so therefore I am my own. What you do to me. It's personal. I am the owner, and so I can lose things. I own the problems, and so they're mine, and I have to try to fix them, but I have to try to control things that are outside of me, and I cannot control things that are outside of me. And so therefore I I am in stress and so on and so forth. And so that this is the underlying problem, the underlying issue, and then it manifests itself in the body through the effect or through the working of the mind.
Wow.
Yeah. So that's the place to go searching. You talk with God, you say, okay, God, you know what it is. I'd be interested in knowing as well. Help me to understand. Um, and he will help you. He wants you to know. And there'll be a good process of growth in God in the meantime. And then one of the other factors that you had mentioned earlier on before we actually began, you didn't know that you mentioned it, but that's fear, right? And so clearly, there is, fear controls your life a bit as well. And fear is not according to the truth, but according to the error as also. And so that's something else to consider, right?
Yes, yes.
Mm.
Well, I
Hmm.
have another question, but I want to give other people another chance. So if somebody else their hand up, take them, and then you can come back later to me.
Okay, will do. So we have Maria Vance. Your hand is up.
Um, does this mean then that the hi- medical history that we fill up when we go to any doctor, um, that is not? I have several examples. For instance, I was diagnosed with very high cholesterol, with being pre-diabetic, very low hormone. Um, and then I also had cancer on my right breast and had radiation treatment. And so I hear my sisters saying, oh, okay, now we need to be super careful with all these things because at least one person in the family has had it. And then, but uh, last year I found out that all my physical illnesses were in my mind. So I am experiencing a lot of health, physical health, mental health. I'm happy. I'm doing a lot of things. I'm very energetic. Uh, and then today I went with a sister. I took her to I took a sister to a doctor, and she always blames my mom that she had to have knee surgery on both knees because my mom had them. And then I have other siblings, two other siblings who also have knee surgery. So other siblings are concerned because there's pain on a knee or, uh, but in what I'm hearing is that if my mother would have had, if it's an inherited, my sister would have been have problems with her knees from conception, right?
Right. Yes.
And my mother would have knee problems from conception. Is that right?
If it was inherited to her as well, yes. Mm-hmm.
Mhm. So
And,
then,
and
then,
it wouldn't just affect the knees.
uh-huh. Then does that then brings us back to the chemicals or to the kind of activities we do, or like in our case, at least 3 brothers and 1 sister has had knee surgery.
Mm-hmm.
And the lifestyle is similar, but they claim that the reason that they have had knee surgery is because they work in the fields and they were always on working, standing up, or really heavy work. Would that be a cause for causing the knees, or more the high diet, high fat, high? Um, so I'm trying to understand how this process, when it's such a physical problem, that a third of my siblings have had major um, knee surgeries. I like to understand why.
Yeah, so if you have 100 people working in the field doing heavy labor, and they are standing or kneeling or doing other things of that nature, and you have 5 people out of that 100 that don't develop knee problems during their lifetime, then those 5 people out of the 100 are the proof that lifestyle, that activity, was not actually the cause of the knee condition, right? Um, Now, if you have people that have a certain dietary factor, and that dietary factor, and you have 100 people that have that same type of diet and so on, and you have somebody that, 5 people that don't develop the condition that have that particular diet, then you can look at it and you can say, okay, well, that dietary pattern is not necessarily the cause. Not that those are not contributing factors. They can be contributing factors, but not the cause, right? And it's important that we consider things from a cause standpoint. Yes, there are many contributing factors, right? Um, and so on. So when we look at these things, we need to, evaluate and say, okay, can diet have an effect on the health of cartilage tissue throughout the body? Yes, it can. Sure. If you have the right nutrients, that's going to be good, in the right concentration, then the cells are going to have what they need. If you have the wrong nutrients, or they're in the wrong concentration, then there can be dysfunction associated with it. If that is the cause, then it should be relatively evenly distributed. Uh, but you've got joints throughout your body. Why is it the knee? Why isn't it the hip? Why isn't it the ankle? Why isn't it the spine? Why is it the low spine and not the mid spine versus the upper spine? And so on, because you have joints in all of those different places as well. So why is it in that location? And and so on. So we need to ask all of those questions. Now, what can cause it to be localized to a particular joint? It's not inheritance, and it's not chemicals. The two things that can localize something in the body is either physical trauma or the mind. Right? Those are the two things that can localize. Unless there's a type of tissue or a type of cell that's in the knee joint that is not in other joints. Then it can be localized there, right? Then it can be localized there. Because it can be inheritance, and chemicals can be localized where a particular type of cell is. Now, I'm not aware, somebody can inform me, but I'm not aware of there being a particular type of cell in the knee that you don't find in other joints as well, that is simply isolated to the knee. and clearly there would not be a certain type of cell in the left knee and another type of cell in the right knee. It's the same type of cell. So if we start developing problems in one knee versus another knee and so on, then we have to ask ourselves the question, why? And again, you have physical trauma that could be a reason why it's one side versus the other, or it can be the mind that can be a reason why it's one side versus the other, or it's that set of joints as opposed to other sets of joints and so on. So these are the things that we need to kind of think through in the process of considering the various different causes. Now, yes, there can be associated factors. Yes, there can be an underlying genetic mutation that's there that doesn't manifest itself, but the underlying genetic mutation, and now all of the hot dogs that you eat, and now the physical trauma, and now the mind having stress because of this thing or that thing, and so on and so forth. And now you have a manifestation there in that knee or those knees, but the other joints are okay. So that can be the case. And then what do you address? Well, you want to address the 9/10ths, which is in the mind, and you want to address the chemical factors that could be a contributing factor to it. And you want to address the physical trauma that might be associated with it as well. And there's no addressing the genes. I mean, it is what it is. Um, Now, when it comes to joints, the the conventional wisdom in orthopedics is that joints do not wear out because of overuse. Joints wear out because of underuse and poor blood flow. And so it's a question of what's the blood flow in the small blood vessels going to the cartilage of the joint and causing the blood flow to be less. Is there cardiovascular disease in those little arteries that are feeding the cartilage and then causing it to decrease? If so, do they have blockages like the arteries of the heart do? And so on. And if they have blockages like the arteries of the heart do, then we go, okay, well, there is a nerve that's going to that artery, and so on. So we're coming back to the mind again. So,
Thank you.
yes, you're welcome. Is depression inherited? No. Well, somebody might have a tendency, right? Somebody might have a tendency because you do have a spiritual inheritance from your parents, right? So there can be a predisposition to look at things from a, um, what should I say? You can have a predisposition to look at things from a fatalistic standpoint or, other things of that nature. But nobody else can think for you but you. And so, yes, there can be predispositions in regards to weaknesses, in regards to thinking patterns, but depression is the result of my own thought patterns and my own thinking, and then its effect on the production of the chemicals in the body, and then the feelings that come associated with that, and so on, and that whole cycle. So. Um, So, somebody is saying that my mold symptoms come and go and go and come back again. If mold was the only cause, then the symptoms should be consistent and the same every day. Is that correct? Yes. So the coming and going is then going to be the impact of the mind, right? In the context of then, because some individuals, I mean, you're in the situation of the mold, and then you have come go, worse, better, and so on and so forth, and then you're in somewhere else that doesn't have any mold, and you don't have the come go, and worse, better. It just kind of tends to fade away, and so on. But then that tells me that there's a mind component to it. in addition to the mold. And then, of course, the question is, well, where did the sensitivity to the mold come from in the first place? If somebody did not have that from birth, right? Now, if it was from birth and somebody was always mold sensitive and always having some manifestations coming associated with it, then yeah, there's a possibility that there's some inheritance components um, associated with it. That's a possibility. But if there was a period of time in life where it was normal, and then boom, you started having sensitivity to mold and other things of that nature, then I would say, okay, we got to look at the mind as the cause. Um, Another question, how do we deal with perimenopause or menopause symptoms according to the law of life? Right. Um, so, yes, I mean, menopause or perimenopause is going to be um, the effect of sin, right? Um, Uh, and the age of menopause and perimenopause is going to be the effect of sin and the cumulative effect of sin and so on from generation to generation passed on. Um, Women back before the flood would have borne up into their multiple hundreds and they were bearing children. And of course, if sin had not entered into the picture, then it's potential that Mary could have continued. I mean, Eve could have continued having children, and having children, and having children, and 15,000 years later, having another baby, and so on. And for some reason, I suspect that if that was the case, it would have been kind of one at a time, and get them to a certain age, and then have another one, and so on. But I don't know for sure. But when it comes to perimenopause and menopause symptoms, some individuals just struggle like crazy through that, and they have all sorts of symptoms. They need to have ice cubes and a fan and a deep freezer to jump into from time to time, and others, whew, smooth sailing. You know, no hot flashes. Uh, no struggling with depression or feeling down or other things of that nature, and so on. So when you have somebody that can smooth sail through it and you have somebody else that struggles through it, then there has to be a difference between the two. And then the question is, well, what's the difference between the two? When we look at it from a law of life standpoint, well, the difference between the two um, is is not just going to be an inherited issue, because inheritance can't turn itself on and turn itself off. And when you have the hot flashes, what's happening is you're having fluctuations of hormone levels that are happening, and release of certain chemicals that then hit the temperature regulating centers and the hypothalamus and so on. And so inheritance can't turn on and turn off and go up and go down and so on like that. It's not an inheritance issue. Uh, you might have symptoms that are worse under the influence of certain chemicals. So if you're eating certain diets or other things of that nature, and if you're not under the influence of those chemicals, it's not so bad. But the fluctuations aren't, related to the chemicals, because when you have a meal now and you eat something that I mean, it should be something where the symptoms go up like this, and then you're digesting, and then you run out of that, and then your symptoms should go down, but you're like, oh, and then later, and so on. And that is not something that's inheritance. That's not something just chemical exposure. Um, it's not physical trauma either, because there's no physical trauma that's happening. And so where do we look back? Well, we look to the mind, right? And so, what's going on in the mind of an individual where there is a significant struggle going on with the menopause and the perimenopause and excess bleeding, excess pain, hot flashes, other discomforts associated with it. And so the same thing that I talked about before, as we evaluate, okay, is there any conflict, or is there any stress? Is there any resentment or bitterness or um, uh, guilt, control, um, and regret, from the past, and fear and other things of that nature. All of that is going to be coming from the sinful nature. What lies am I believing? What is the truth instead of that, and replacing the lies with the truth by God's grace, and a growth in Christ. And if you go through perimenopause and you go through menopause, and it's a struggle, but through the struggle, you grow much closer to Christ. You understand your own nature better. You replace truths and replace error with the truth, and so on. Well, I look at it and I say, well, praise the Lord, right? That's a good outcome associated with it. So the struggles are not there for our destruction. The struggles are there for our benefit, right? It's there for our purification. And it should be there for our purification. There is another question here. Do you believe seasonal affective disorder is a reality? Right, seasonal affective disorder. So that refers to a condition where individuals develop. It's essentially a depression, or a depression-like syndrome. It doesn't necessarily have to bring an individual to the point where they're not functional, but where they feel quite bad, specifically in the context of winter and or environments where there's little sun exposure for long periods of time. And seasonal affective disorder can be treated by going and doing tanning in a sun tanning, location, but making sure that you have, it would be preferable with full spectrum light, because there's certain frequencies of light that have a particular effect. What happens, there's a physical phenomenon that happens in the back of the eyes, in the retina, where certain wavelengths of light striking the retina in the back of the eye, there is an amino acid back there called tryptophan. It's, well, other parts of the body as well, but it's there too. And under the influence of the light, the tryptophan is converted to serotonin. And serotonin is one of the neuroregulatory chemicals in the brain. It's kind of a mood regulator, and so on. And many of your antidepressant medications are medications that affect serotonin levels in the brain. So can a lack of sunshine over a long period of time, and a lack of exposure to those light levels and those light frequencies, result in an individual feeling a particular way? And the answer is yes, it can, right? It can cause an individual to feel a particular way. Can it cause an individual to be depressed? No. The depression is going to be the result not only of the feeling that comes from that, but it's going to be a combination of the feeling plus my thought processes associated with that feeling. And if in response to the feeling, I continue to praise the Lord and have thanksgiving, and I focus on Him, and I'm grateful for Him for His sacrifice, and I revel in the love of God, even though I'm in the basement of the prison and locked in solitary confinement, and I don't have access to the sunlight and all that kind of stuff. Yes, there can be feelings that are there, but I don't have to succumb to those feelings by the grace of God, right? And so therefore I don't have to enter into depression, even though there is a physical effect that will have an effect on feelings. Okay, then I'll go on in the chat. If bipolar disease is also a result of erroneous beliefs, how can one help a loved one suffering as a result of their disease? Well, it is, it's by the grace of God. And so you want to bring them to God. You want to encourage them that there's a God who loves them, who cares for them. Um, and you want to encourage them with his love and his grace towards them. Um, when it comes to bipolar disorder, um, there are some patterns. I'm not saying that this is always the case, but often there is an unresolved bitterness in the life of the individual, typically because of a childhood trauma. Um, and that may be sexual abuse, right? That is something from the past or something else where they see an injustice as being done against themselves by one who's close to them, a loved one, and and they can't get their mind off of the injustice, um, and they can't reconcile the difference between their need for the individual and to get love from the individual, but their hatred of the individual for what the individual has done to them. And so they see themselves as the victim, but they also see themselves as in need of what the other individual has. And so now there's that back and forth conflict that is in the mind of the individual. And then you have an individual that eventually develops bipolar disorder, and they tend to cycle between depression and then elation, uh, staying up long, talking fast, being very hyperactive, and things of that nature. And they might go around and buy one car and drive it to the next. One individual with his bipolar, when he was in his manic phase, he went and bought a Cadillac, and then he took the Cadillac to another dealer and traded it in for another Cadillac, and then drove that to another dealer and traded it in for another Cadillac, and drove to another dealer and traded it in for another Cadillac. And of course, when you go to the next dealer and you're trading one in for another one, you're going to lose a significant amount. And so he just blew tons of money in his mania. And anyways, I do know of individuals that have, they've resolved their bipolar disorder. They don't suffer with it anymore, but it's usually in the context of forgiveness, coming to the cross, exchanging the life with the life of Christ, and um, and recognizing that I am not the one that the individuals did the things to. No injustice has ever been done to me. And anything that has ever been done, it's been done against Jesus because he took my place. It's not me. I don't hold on to it. I don't need them to apologize. I don't need them to acknowledge. I don't need them to anything. There's nothing that I hold against them, and so on. Now, I'm not saying that's the only thing that's associated with bipolar, but it's an example of something that is associated with bipolar disorder. And kind of a direction in heading in. Counseling, I think, can be helpful if you have a good biblical counselor, and exposing them to the truth. But if they're not interested, if they're not willing to listen and so on, you wait, you pray, and um, you know, you let the Lord work in their lives, and you don't push them, but you're there to be a support for them when you need, when is needed. And if they're in a condition or a state where they are going to harm themselves or they're going to harm others, then it's appropriate to get the authorities involved, and let them deal with what they need to deal with, whether that's emergency medical services or police or other things of that nature, or other ones of that nature. Another question. Since the subconscious regulates many body functions, is there a type of subconscious will making subconscious decisions? Well, the subconscious decision maker is the heart, right? And the heart is evaluating information in terms of gain and loss, right? The conscious will is evaluating information in terms of right and wrong, good and evil, right? But it's the unconscious heart that is evaluating things from a gain-loss standpoint. And when I am in a situation because of the deception of the heart, where I am unable to avoid the loss, I'm unable to say no to the loss. And now I feel, because of my perceptions, forced into loss. Now there's a dysregulation of the unconscious processing, right? And it's a heart problem, but the part of the mind, the heart. And yes, that's going to, that's going to manifest itself in the body. Um, how does the unconscious mind function moment by moment in relation to blood pressure and temperature regulation and all of these other types of things? What specifically are the mechanisms associated with it? Good question. Yeah, good question. And do we want to know more? Yes, we do. Uh, as we continue studying these things out and seeking to understand them, should we know more over time? Yes, we should. Do we have a lot of time to figure all of it out? No, I don't think so. I think Jesus is coming soon. And so is it important, the details that we can't figure out? No. What's really important is what God has revealed to us, and it's for us and for our children. And the things that He has not clearly revealed, well, it's nice to study things out and learn new things here and there, but we should major in the majors and minor in the minors. All right, so somebody said about bipolar condition, isn't it a result of a lack of or overproduction of certain chemicals in the brain? Well, yes, it's associated with that, but what is it that controls the production of chemicals in the brain? We went over that earlier in this presentation, right? The chemicals that are made in the brain are under the influence of the mind or the spirit, and so it's the action of the spirit on the brain and the electrical activity through the neurons that then results in the release of chemicals or the production of chemicals at the ends of the neurons. And so it's going to be a spirit issue or a spiritual issue that is going to result in a change in the chemicals that are produced in the brain. And then yes, you can look at it and it will change the chemical environment. It will have an effect on the physical structure of the brain, because you can look at somebody that has bipolar disorder and you can see that there are certain parts of the brain that are smaller than they should be, or other parts that are bigger than they should be, and so on. This is not because the bipolar condition is not because the certain parts are bigger and other parts are smaller. It's not because chemicals are off and so on. The chemicals are off and the other parts are big and the other parts are small because of the spirit and the dysfunction of the spirit and its information and electrical impulses that it's sending to the brain, and then its control and regulation of brain function. Um, and yes, you can have physical trauma of the brain. You can put a bullet through or a knife through and so on, and you can have dysfunction from that. But a bullet through the brain is not going to cause bipolar disorder. A knife in the brain is not going to cause bipolar disorder, because the trauma is fairly fixed and bipolar cycles. And so there has to be something that causes the cycling, right? And what is it that can upregulate and downregulate, and it's not related to diet, and it can't be inheritance, right? So it's got to be the mind.
I wanted to quickly ask you because someone said that Michaela and Dr. Horst also has other groups similar to these. And I was just wondering if there's any way to combine all of them. Well, because of the time, I suppose, the time that they are there, it may not work, but it would be awesome just to have a single law of life that several presenters present, but that was just my my wish. That's my wish.
Yes, that would be nice. But actually, I think it's probably better for things to be, what should I say? Human tendency is to centralize. And I think God's plan is really to decentralize. He's the central point, but he inspires different individuals and they're in different places, different locations, different time zones, different whatever, and different perspectives as well. I mean, that's one reason why we have Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Uh, because different individuals have different perspectives. They see things from a different way, they approach it from a different way, and then it has a different effect. Um, and yes, so we do this on Monday evenings. There's Ben and Anita McGee. Ben does a book club, Law of Life book club on Monday evenings as well. Horst doesn't. Horst does a he does a weekly Bible school, kind of following the Sabbath school lesson, um, roughly. And that comes out on Friday evenings. It is on the um, let's see, it's the YouTube channel is called The Bible School. So if you go to YouTube and you type in The Bible School, that would be Horst, and his weekly um, Sabbath school lesson, and that is done in English, German, Romanian. Uh, it's translated into Spanish and Hungarian, and I don't remember what other languages have it as well. So he has a pretty good repertoire, I think, of Spanish resources there. There's also the Law of Life channel, which is Horst's YouTube channel in English, The Law of Life. So if you go to YouTube at The Law of Life, then that would take you to Horst's YouTube channel, which has some shorter videos, but it has some series on the law of life, on education or parenting. And he's got a few series that are there. Uh, Carmen Bajan um, in Australia. She also has a YouTube channel. And Carmen, if you're on, I'm sorry, I can't remember what your channel's name is right now. I'm blanking on it. But anyway, she will invite Horst and she'll invite Mikola and Stephanie Faber and she'll invite others that are that know this message and are sharing this message to give presentation. I don't remember if it's every week or every other week. That's on her channel. I'm gonna have to look that up. Sorry, don't remember offhand. And then there is the new documentary series by um, Silvio and Liliana, and that is on YouTube called Meet Life. Meet Life is their YouTube channel, and the documentary is Breaking the Deception. Let's see what other things are out there happening. Um, there is um, there is Luce um, Brinkhouse. She's in Australia as well. Bilingual, Spanish and English. And I don't know if, I have to ask her if she records the sessions that she does or if she just does the sessions.
She
Um,
does record them, Dr.
she
Matt.
does record them. Okay.
Yes.
Lindsay, if you got a link to, where she has her recordings, if you can just post it in the chat as well, that would be great. And what Luce does is Luce goes through Horst's videos, she goes through my videos, and maybe some other videos, and they'll watch the video for a little bit, she'll pause, she'll explain, ask questions, and so on, and then they'll watch some more, and then pause and explain and ask questions and whatnot. And and I'm sure there's more somewhere. Those are the things that I can think of off the top of my head in relation to r relatively regular media-based law of life materials that are being produced on a fairly regular basis. Maria, you had your hand up still.
Yes, that's what I wanted to see if whoever knows the resources of some of the things that you're talking about, if they can post them on the chat and then I can write them down, that would be awesome.
Yes, so for those things that I mentioned, if somebody has time to go look those up, post them in the chat, that would be great. Um, and Grace said that Luce also goes through my book and Dr. Mueller's book, and then comments on those or discusses those as well. I'm just going to show you some resources that are available on YouTube. So we'll just run here to YouTube. Let me pull that out of the way. All right, so here we have, no thanks. All right, so here we have Meat Life. So if you go to YouTube and you type in Meat Life, or you go look for Meat Life, then it is going to have the, move me out of the way. It is going to have the Breaking the Deception a documentary. And so you have the prologue here, and then you have the first episode with Margaret, and then the second episode with Margaret, and other episodes are going to be coming in time, right? And so keep an eye out for that. Now, if we go back to our main YouTube channel or our main YouTube screen, then if we come up here, of course, you've got New Paradigm Ministries, you know that. But if you go at uh, the law of life, so at the law of life, then it's going to take you right here, and you have the law of life channel. It's got the hands with the little growing plant in the middle of it. And here we have Horst Mueller's channel in English, and it has a few different playlists that are here, including some short videos on the law of life. Here's a law of life series. This one is on education and parenting, the fundamentals of education. And then this is another law of life series on stress, anxiety, conflicts, and depression. And if you go to home and you go down to the bottom, then there's another channel in Spanish. Here's another channel in Portuguese, and here is another channel, and I think that's German. So you have those that are available as well. Um, if you go and you look so you go to YouTube, so I'll go back there so it's not too confusing. If you go back to your main YouTube screen and you look at the Bible School, boom, and you click on that, then right here it's the Bible School. And this is where Horst Mueller puts out his weekly lessons according to the Sabbath School lesson. So we're currently going through Exodus, and he's usually a week ahead of the lesson so that you can go over it the week before, and because if you're teaching in your church or whatever, um, and so on. And so it has lots and lots and lots because he's been doing this a long time. So it started back with the book of Job and then the Holy Spirit and then so on. And so these are a quarter each. So that's like a full year. That's a full year. Here's a full year. There's a full year. There's a full year. There's a full year. There's a full year. And there's a full year. And we're part way through here. So he's been doing it for quite a while. Lots of stuff that you can pick up on here, which is helpful. If you go back to home, and then you scroll down to the bottom, then there is the Bible School in Spanish. You can click on that and go there. There's the Bible School in German. There's the Bible School in, I think that's Romanian, if I'm not mistaken. And here's the Bible School in Hungarian. So you can find all of those resources, right? And let's see if you go back to YouTube and um oh, somebody help me out. Let's see where Carmen's um that's not called Carmen Jean. I'm just looking for Carmen. Anybody know what Carmen's um channel
The
is?
Lighthouse. The Lighthouse channel.
Oh, thank you.
Dr. Matt.
All right. Thank you. Channel. Dun, 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 dun. Oh, not Lighthouse Horror.
It might just be Lighthouse, not that.
All right.
Mm.
Dun, 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 dun. All right, I'm gonna have to find that for you. Um,
Lighthouse Media.
oh, there we go. Thank you. Something. Lighthouse Meet. That's not it.
Not that one. It's just black and white.
It's not that one.
That's the one.
This is
Yeah,
one.
that's the one.
Okay.
Yeah, with the circle.
All right. So Lighthouse Media. So if you're on YouTube, it's at Lighthouse Media 5521. So at Lighthouse Media 5521. And Carmen, she invites Horst on. She invites, I've been on there as well, and others. It's usually live when it's convenient in Australia, which is not as convenient in the United States. But usually they can coordinate pretty well between Europe and Australia and so on. So there's a number of videos that are there that are Law of Life mediated, and I am going to plead ignorance because I've never actually gone to it. Luce, what is your channel?
I don't have a channel.
You don't have a okay.
No, I don't.
Do you post the sessions that you do anywhere?
No, I don't.
Okay.
I mean, I do record them, and we have a chat group, and when people request it, those are sent off.
Oh, all right. So that can be helpful. All right. So you have recordings. All right. And the people that want recordings can have access to that. So yes, that's another thing that we might want to have a channel for that too. And all right, before we run away, Grace has her hand up. Grace.
Yes, sorry, Dr. Sandoval. I know we're over time. Just quickly though, here in Perth, one of our ministers has started a church for children on the spectrum.
Okay.
And I guess how can one introduce the law of life to children? I always I get tongue tied with Ellen White. I know she says we've got like the first 2-3 years to get the character right, and everybody thinks children don't know anything until they're about 3 or 4, and so how could we? I'm just a volunteer at the church at the it's called Sensational Church because of senses. And so how could we best support the children in terms of the law of life?
So one of the best ways is just giving sensory examples of taking and giving, right? And and so whether you have a little straw or a little kind of flexible small hose or something like that, where you can put it in water in one side and you've got a cup or a bowl or something like that on the other side, and you kind of suck and then you put it down lower than the other level, and you can see the water going through, and then it's coming in the other side. Okay, well, this functions like a channel, right? And if it's going to give something, it has to first take something, right? It's got to have one end in the source before it can give anything out the other side. And so that's like a visual illustration that can be there. There's you can take the example of a little plant or a flower or something like that. You have the flower on the plant, and maybe you have a flower that's got, you talk about it having roots in the ground, and the roots, it's taking water and it's taking nutrients, and it's bringing those up, and then the flower is giving, and the flower is giving water, and it's giving carbon dioxide, and it's giving things that you can't see. But how can you tell that it's taking and giving, and it needs the taking and the giving? Well, let's get one of the flowers and clip it. And now you leave the one flower that's clipped plus the other flowers that are on its, still on the plant. And then you do some other activities for a while. And it's nice to have one of them like petunias or something like that kind of wilt pretty quick. Um, and, and then you show them that when they're cut off from the source, well, then they begin to die, because you must have the source in order for it to live. But as long as it's connected with the source and it can take and it can give, well, then it can continue to live and function the way that it's supposed to. And so, you give things that they can interact with, that they can look at, and if they get more and more and more and more and more examples that everything takes and everything gives and everything takes and everything gives, then as their age gets a little more, then you can start talking to them about what does that look like in relationships? What does that look like spiritually, and so on. So, Jesus is like the soil that we're planted in, and he's like the sunshine, and he's like the rain, and so he provides all of the things that we need. And as long as we're connected to him and we're planted in him, then we can take and we can give, and we live. But if we're cut off from Jesus and we don't get the rain and we don't get the sunshine and we're not in the soil and so on, then we're just going to wither up. And so there's various different ways that you can use visual illustrations or other sensory illustrations to show the principle of taking and give. And then, depending upon the age group of the children that you're dealing with, and drawing the connections, the lessons from that standpoint.
Yeah, that makes sense. I love that. I can even share it like at church, with the children's story. That's beautiful. Thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure. Yeah. All right. Well, it's that time. And
Can I just say something?
yeah, sure. Go ahead, Bronca.
Belinda from New Zealand just wrote the children book on law of life, and some copies just came out. This may help.
Oh,
Yeah.
yes, please. Can you share the link where to get those books, please?
Yeah, I was now searching. I have to figure out. Yeah, she's on a WhatsApp group. I will see if she's on a Telegram law of life group.
She has an address. Let's see. Let me pull that up for you.
Luz, do you know? Are you on that Telegram
It's
group?
Yeah, yes, I know her contact also, but Dr.
Are you
Sandoval
able
might
to
be able to
Yeah,
give it
would you
to
be able to share the book with me?
Yahoo.
Yes, I will try to find out. I haven't seen it,
So
but I
in the
will
chat,
definitely.
yeah, it's McCallion2000 at yahoo.com. No. Sorry, hotmail.com. I put that on there wrong. It's McCallion 2000 at hotmail.com. All right, so it's the
Are you
last.
sharing that on the chat, Dr.
Yeah,
Sandra?
I'm
Oh,
sharing.
there we go.
Mm-hmm.
So that email, we just email the Yahoo one or the Hotmail
Oh, the
one?
Hotmail one. The Yahoo one was a mistake. Yeah.
Okay, and then we can just ask her for the book or copy.
Delete that so you don't get confused on that. And yes, you can ask her about the book. I think she had a short run printing of a couple hundred books or something like that, but she just had it finished. And right now is it right now that she's in the States? I think she's in the States, or she's coming to the States in the next week or something like that. So I'm
That's
not
right.
sure whether she's in New Zealand or whether she's in the States, but you can email her. She's the one that did it. The book is really for like 3 to 7 year olds or so,
Mm.
with the law of life. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. All right, time for bed. And my computer is saying 9%. I didn't make it with my plug because we were out and then we got back and my backpack, and so I came right to the office. And so if we don't end soon, it will end soon anyways. So let's pray. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for your blessings and your good mercies. You are a wonderful God. We are so grateful that you are a wonderful God. Draw us close to you, work out your perfect will and way, and bring about your goodness in our lives. And Lord, as we consider the various different physical dysfunctions, may we think of these various different causes and seek for the cause, and by your grace to remove it. And Lord, to trust in you to be our healer. And this we pray in Jesus' name. Amen.